Andrew Collins, welcome to the program.
Yes, good day to you.
Andrew Collins is the author of several books, including The Cygnus Mystery, Beneath the Pyramids, Egypt's Greatest Secret Uncovered, and today's subject of conversation, From the Ashes of Angels, The Forbidden Legacy of a Fallen Race. You can learn more about Andrew Collins' research by visiting andrewcollins.com. Andrew, as advertised, this is a show about the Nephilim. I know a lot of people already know about Genesis 6:4, but I have several versions of the Bible here, and not all even use the word. What is the etymology of Nephilim?
Well, it means those have fallen, or the fallen ones, basically. And it's a term that's most obviously used in the Book of Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament, where it's actually used in the context of there existed in these ancient days these people called Nephilim, and at that same time came the sons of God upon the daughters of men and produced Geborim, which means the mighty ones or the strong ones. And this is in Genesis chapter 6, and there's a follow-up chapter to this, so saying similar. And it's a very enigmatic statement because the Nephilim are actually separated from the term sons of God. And the sons of God, which in Hebrew is basically Elohim, is treated to be some kind of angelic being, and that they were able to come on to, mortal women who then subsequently produced the sort of hybrid offspring, if you like. And that's about it. Now, this is something that supposedly happened just prior to the birth of Noah and the flood of Noah, which obviously created the rejuvenation of humanity, so that anything that existed before this time was wiped off the face of the earth. So in theory, the Nephilim, the sons of God, anything else like this, who had some kind of corporeal tangibility were destroyed, and obviously the offspring of the sons of God. However, it's a story that's expanded in texts outside of the Bible, such as the Book of Enoch, the oldest copies of which have been found amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date to around the 3rd to 4th century BC.
Enoch comes after Genesis has been written.
He's in the Book of Genesis, but he comes after the stories of the Nephilim being on earth and the creation of the mighty men, the Geborim, which are the offspring of the sons of God and mortal women. So that's a period that existed in what's known as antediluvian times, i.e. before the flood. And everything that comes after the flood is essentially of God, and, all those bad things that happened beforehand no longer exist. But that's not quite true, because firstly, there are other texts which certainly were as important as the Book of Genesis in the days before the coming of Christ, but tended to be relegated to works that were either banned or forgotten about or ignored in the early days of Christianity, such as the Book of Enoch. And here, the Nephilim take a different role. Here, the Nephilim are the offspring of the coming together of these angelic beings known as the Watchers, which in Hebrew is a word called irin, which basically means to watch or to observe. And again, mortal women. The Nephilim are these hybrids between the two, whereas that's not the case in the Book of Genesis. There is a certain amount of confusion come in, but essentially, for our purposes, let's see the Nephilim as the offspring of the Watchers, or as they're called in Genesis, the sons of God, the Elohim, and that these Nephilim are these half-humans, half-Watchers who go on a rampage, drinking blood, doing bad things, and the rest of it that exist. And according to the Book of Enoch, what happens is that their fathers are then rounded up and incarcerated by the Watchers that remained loyal to heaven, and the Nephilim are themselves rounded up and killed, many of which are still infants at this time, and their parents are made to watch this infanticide taking place. Now, obviously, these are fables. These are fantasy stories that exist within these religious texts. However, there may well be some kind of basis in reality to do with them, because the Watchers are also said to have given humanity the arts and sciences of heaven. And many of these appear to be like the rudiments of early civilization, the firsts of humanity. And all of these took place in a general area of the ancient world, which we know today as the Near East. Was also the cradle of civilization, the place where the so-called Neolithic revolution began around 9000 BC by, some kind of event that created a transition from hunter-gatherers to agriculturalists, settled farmers, animal husbandry, all the rest of it took place. And with it came a lot of inventions. And a lot of these inventions are accredited to the Watchers in the Book of Enoch. So there seems to be some kind of connection to real historical events, like a lost page in human history. So there's something in all of this. So in other words, the Nephilim could have actually existed on Earth as real flesh and blood beings.
The Book of Enoch doesn't make the cut, though. The Council of Nicaea didn't include it in the Bible, so...
That's right, yeah.
Does that not bring its credibility into question?
No, not at all, because I think that the reason why it would appear to have been so controversial and to have been dropped is because it's clearly talking about the idea that angels, who are in theory are incorporeal, they're messengers of God that exist in some kind of ethereal state between here and heaven, actually taking on physical form, let's say flesh and blood, to be able to lie with more women to produce babies. And there are accounts, for instance, like the miraculous birth of Noah himself, which is given in a few of the so-called Enochian texts, where the baby comes out and he's white, his skin is white, his hair is white, sun shines out of his eyes, and he has red ruddy blotches on skin as well. And his father says to his wife, look, this baby is not like us. You must have been sleeping with the Watchers to have produced a baby like this. And she says, no, husband, no, I've not slept with anybody else other than you. This is our child. Now, the interesting thing about this story and others like it, they also appear in Persian mythology as well, is that it suggests that the idea that Watchers could sleep with mortal women to produce babies that look different to other members of the community was considered a reality in some strange way. And although this is only recorded within these Enochian myths and legends, it does suggest that it's based on real events in time, that these babies were produced that did not look like the local pathology of the people involved, that there was something different about them, that they looked like the angels. Now, why did they look like the angels? Why is it that a child of this appearance should be considered to be the appearance of an angel? There's something in these stories, that's what I'm saying.
Are the Nephilim all male then, or are there female Nephilim?
Okay, look, the Nephilim are not given a lot of time in things like the Book of Enoch or even in the Book of Genesis, although they do crop up a few times in later books within the Old Testament. But basically around the time of Joshua and Moses, where there seem to be like the forerunners of giant races, like the Anakim and the Rephaim, so that it is possible that some of them, if they did exist, continued to thrive somewhere in the Near East and became like the ancestors of supposedly giant races. Again, that's only what the Bible tells us. The reality of that we don't know, and we could be dealing with thousands of years difference in time. However, the book where the Nephilim are brought out in full and are given personalities and names is something called the Book of Giants. Now, this is a text that circulated at the same time as the Book of Enoch. In fact, it would seem as if they were part of the same package. This was even more controversial than the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch talks about angels sleeping with mortal women to produce these offspring, these giant offspring, whereas the Book of Giants is all about those giant offspring, the Nephilim, and about their plight, their relationship to people like Enoch, their relationship to their fathers, the Watchers, and also the fact that they are experiencing strange dreams which suggest that they're just about to be wiped out in fire and flood. Now, the flood we know about from the Book of Genesis. This is obviously the flood of Noah that completely encompasses the whole earth and destroys everything from antediluvian times other than Noah and his family. However, the anxiety of the Nephilim within the Book of Giants is very strong, and it's almost like, look, we're having these weird dreams. What do we do about it? You know, they suggest that we're about to be wiped out, and so are our fathers. Who should we talk to about this? And what happens is that one of them is actually sent to try and find Enoch. Now, Enoch is this antediluvian patriarch, obviously the supposed writer of the Book of Enoch. And according to the Book of Genesis, he has been translated to heaven miraculously. Other accounts say he's translated to paradise. And although this might suggest that he's sort of bodily taken up into the sky, there are some accounts which suggest that paradise is a location somewhere else in the geographical, mythological world that the Watchers and the Nephilim exist. And I would place that somewhere in the area of the Near East, what we know today as Eastern Turkey, perhaps northwest Iraq, western Iran, that type of area. And from the Ashes of Angels, one of my books, I actually show that there are some traditions that suggest that a place that has a name very close to paradise probably existed in the area of western Iran, that sort of region, which is just to the east of Eastern Turkey. Certainly at the time when a lot of these texts were being written, which was probably from around the time of Christ through until medieval times. But again, you have to say to yourself, how much of this is based on actual history of humankind? It's difficult to say. I would say some of it. And obviously encoded within these texts are a lot of mythological ideas that have a basis in reality. That's it really. And obviously that the end product of the Book of Giants is that the Nephilim are destroyed within this fire and flood that takes place. However, unfortunately, the Book of Giants is fragmentary, so we don't really know exactly what happens. We've only got certain tracks from it. We haven't got exactly the full story yet.
Nephilim seems to be tied in with a lot of other conversations, such as Anunnaki, reptilians. What, if any, relationship does it have with those?
Well, reptilians, none, really, other than the fact that the term reptilians really was something that was first totally promoted by David Icke in some of his books as like some kind of alien-based creature that lives within a human dynasty that has produced, everything from Sumerian gods to the British royal family. Now, I don't believe in that, I'm afraid. But what I will say is that David Icke took some of his ideas from my book, From the Ashes of Angels, because it does talk in there, and he acknowledges this, by the way, it talks in there about statues that are either lizard or more obviously snake-headed that were found in the graves of a culture called the Ubaid in the area of Iraq. Now, these graves date to around 4,000 to 5,000 BC, and they are both males, females, and females holding babies that also have similar sort of reptilian or serpent-like heads. And these are almost certainly some kind of abstract memory of ancestors that had features that were said to be serpent-like. I think lizard is a misnomer. I don't think that they're lizard-like whatsoever. I think that they're much more obviously snake-like in appearance. And indeed, there are actually papers that have been written which suggest that the elongation of skulls with babies that took place in the Near East from around 8,000 BC right the way down to Ubaid times, so a period of about 4,000 years, that a lot of these abstract statues that were found in the graves represent people from this particular, elite group who actually elongated their heads. And why did they elongate their heads? Because it's very possible that they themselves saw themselves as descendants of people that had serpent-like features. And this is something which is brought out in one Enochian text, where it actually describes a watcher as having a visage like a viper, obviously a viper being a type of snake. And I take that to be a very elongated head with elongated facial features, something which was clearly different to the way that mortal kind or the communities that existed within the Near East at that time actually looked like. They were different. So, in other words, this snake or lizard-like appearance, I think, relates to ancestors that had elongated facial and skull cranial features, and that they existed probably at a period around the very beginning of the Neolithic Revolution, around 9,000 BC, possibly even slightly earlier.
And the Anunnaki?
Anunnaki, well, obviously this is a separate tradition. This is something that is found within Sumerian and Akkadian myth and legend. Obviously these were the ruling dynasties of Mesopotamia that rose during the 3rd millennium BC. And obviously we have their myths and legends recorded in various cuneiform inscriptions which were handed down through Babylonian times and then obviously rediscovered in archaeological sites today. The term Anunnaki means basically gods of heaven and earth. And they are said to have given humanity the rudiments of civilization, everything from the first cities to the irrigation channels to the first animal domestication to the first wheat. All of these are said to have been handed to us by the Anunnaki. Now, as to who they were and their relationship to the Watchers, who were themselves a form of angels, it's something which is associated by virtue of proximity, really, because the Mesopotamia, particularly northern Mesopotamia, is the same area where the stories of the Book of Genesis and the Book of Enoch would seem to have been played out. So, in other words, if we're talking about mythical beings that existed in this area that gave humanity the rudiments of civilization, they're probably going to be one and the same, although the strains have gone into different mythological traditions. One of them Mesopotamian, Sumerian, Akkadian, and the other Semitic, most obviously Hebrew, or probably Canaanite as well. In other words, we're talking about the same roots. And I think that, we are talking about some kind of elite group, I think, that entered the area probably shortly after the end of the last ice age. And they had ideas. They invented things. They were probably very advanced people, and they changed things. They catalyzed great changes and took people from a simple hunter-gathering form of life. When I say simple, I mean it was a free life where they could basically do what they want, and changed everything, brought people together, put them in settled communities, and thereafter they became part of a agricultural community, which was the foundation point of the Neolithic Revolution, which then spread out very quickly. I mean, when I say very quickly, over a couple of thousand years, north, south, east and west, into Europe, into Central Asia, down into the area of Africa and the Levant area, sort of Israel, Palestine, etc. And obviously east and southeast into the Indus Valley. This was the beginning of it. And the memory of the prime movers behind this, I think, are remembered by us under the term Watchers, Angels, Anunnaki, and many other terms as well.
Let's talk about the Watchers. Little is known about the Nephilim, so I'm assuming far less is even known about the Watchers.
We're talking about information from ancient texts only. That's where we get the term Watchers. Anything else is interpretation based on that knowledge. But the Book of Enoch tells us that Enoch, the supposed writer of the book, and in all honesty, is unlikely to have been the actual source of this material. But it's said that one night Enoch, while sleeping, was awoken by two angels who are given the name Watchers. I mean, the term is totally synonymous. And they say to him, do you want to come with us and we will show you the seven heavens? And he says, yeah, okay, I'll come with you. So they take him, seemingly flying through the air, and show him the different seven heavens. Now, these seven heavens have things like seas and lakes and volcanoes and mountains and things like that. Very terrestrial-like landscapes. And in one of them is the Garden of Righteousness, that's the term that's used, which is the Garden of Eden as portrayed in the Book of Genesis. And in one of the other heavens, which seems to be sort of in the same context as the Garden of Righteousness, is the abode of the angels. And it seems to be almost like the place that they live, the place that they exist. And this is where, whilst being shown around, he sees this prison, according to the account. And in this prison are all these watchers incarcerated. So he asks his guides, what have they done to deserve that? And he is told that these are the ones that have transgressed the laws of heaven, descended down onto the plains and mixed amongst mortal kind and taken wives who have produced these giant offspring, the Nephilim, but also that these rebels have given humanity the arts and sciences of heaven. This was forbidden, and because of this, because of all of these reasons, they've been put in prison. So that's the story that we're given. But then in the Book of Enoch, you're given lists of different watchers and what exactly they are said to have given to humanity. I mean, one, for instance, is said to have given us the knowledge of astronomy, or another, meteorology, the study of the clouds. Another one taught women how to abort babies, for instance. Another taught us how to work with metal and also how to forge weapons. Another gives us the first mirrors and teaches women how to beautify their eyes. These are all the things that the Watchers are said to have given us, and there are different names that are given on more than one occasion for those that have passed on these arts and sciences of heaven, something which they shouldn't have done, and because they shouldn't have done it, they were punished. But, as I say, all of these things you can see as associated with the evolution of humanity around the time of the Neolithic Revolution. As I say, many of these firsts probably did take place in the area of the Near East, and more specifically southeast Turkey, around 9 to 10,000 BC, and slightly later as well. Some of these, we're talking about a very specific location in the ancient world.
Let's look at the archaeological evidence, the discovery of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey.
Well, Göbekli Tepe, if you can imagine Stonehenge in England, if you can transpose that onto a barren mountaintop in southeast Turkey, then multiply it by 10, then cover all the stones with beautiful carvings of animals and other abstract art, and then bury it beneath a huge mound of earth which was brought from the valleys below to actually create, and then leave it for a period of at least 10,000 years until we come along today and then start digging and find this. That's what Göbekli Tepe is. It's a series of stone circles with their stones having T-shaped tops or T-shaped terminations to them, placed within this huge artificial occupational mound, or tepe as the term says. Göbekli Tepe means essentially navel-like hill. That's what it actually means in Turkish. And this is what is there, and this is what the archaeologists have been exploring ever since 1995, when it was first realised that this site was there to be discovered. And it's an extraordinary place. The oldest structures there uncovered so far date back to around 11,500 years. Now this is at least 6,500 years older than Stonehenge and the Great Pyramid. And yet here is evidence of a very sophisticated culture existing at the end of the last ice age. And this is in the very heart of where the Neolithic revolution begins, just shortly afterwards. And in the past, it was believed that the Neolithic revolution went this way, that because of climate changes, we started to alter the way that we lived and began experimentation with the domestication of plants. And when we perfected this around, let's say, 9,000 BC, we started to do this en masse. Settlements began, they spread and grew, and with it came animal husbandry, the domestication of pigs and cattle and sheep and goats, all within the Near East. And this new lifestyle gave us the opportunity to ponder over life, the universe and everything. So we started building temples and venerating gods and celestial beings, and the infrastructure for these necessitated bigger and bigger settlements and communities that created the first towns and eventually the first cities. That was the old belief. That is now completely out the window with Göbekli Tepe, because it's now quite clear that the temples came first, and that the infrastructure created around temples such as Göbekli Tepe necessitated changes in lifestyle. And no longer could people just be fed by going out and hunting every day, because you had hundreds, if not thousands, of people employed in the construction of these monuments. And somebody said, we're going to have to change things. Look, they've been experimenting with this thing called agriculture, a few places here and there in the Levant and possibly other places. Let's bring this in, let's try this out, let's domesticate these plants and see what happens. And it was an experiment that worked, and it changed everything. So it's now the other way round. The temples came first, and then later the agriculture, and obviously the cities that followed that.
Has this been accepted by the established community of scientists?
Yes, yeah, very much so, absolutely, and only within the past 5 years, really. And this is now completely blowing away ideas that had been there since the 1930s, put in place by, well-known prehistorians such as V. Gordon Childe, who was the guy that basically came up with the whole concept of the Neolithic revolution. I mean, he was a Marxist, and the whole idea of the revolution to him, the revolution in technology and, invention, was something that he associated with the Russian Revolution, and the whole concept of people working together in communities and advancing and evolving in this way. Now we know that that's not quite the case, and that the temples came first, and then came the agricultural revolution.
Ralph Ellis, he's an author and a guest of this program, has submitted a question for you.
Okay.
Roman historians mentioned giant bones. Are these the Nephilim?
Maybe. However, that's a quite vast area to look at in one question. There is no doubt that giant bones, or bones of humans of a giant size, have been discovered in most continents, probably all continents of the world. Most obviously in America, in North America in particular, there are hundreds of accounts in old bulletins and newspapers of Native American mounds being looked at and bones being found here. Now, obviously, anthropologists look at these and either dismiss them, or they say, well, yeah, obviously you can get people up to 8 feet today, the tallest man in the world sort of thing. And it's just a sort of gene mutation. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's any kind of race, particular type of species of human being out there with these characteristics. But the more we go on, the more evidence there does appear that there were giant species of humans existing in the past. But it's still something that anthropology will not handle in any way. Going back to your question about whether they're the Nephilim, we have to be careful here because the term Nephilim obviously comes from the Book of Genesis. It comes from other texts such as the Book of Giants and obviously the Book of Enoch itself. And here, yes, they are described as giant in size, but these are mythological accounts. They could easily be exaggerated out of all proportion. I mean, the Watchers themselves were said to be as tall as trees, for instance. So what does that mean? Does that mean that they were 30, 40 feet tall or something like that? Or does it just mean that they were taller than everybody else? So in other words, we should be very careful to associate the word Nephilim with the giant bones that have been discovered around the world. However, the connection does highlight the fact that we are missing an aspect of human evolution which needs to be looked at very closely. And I know some of my colleagues are looking at this now. Some of them have or are doing books on this subject. And we need to look very, very closely at claims of giant bones. They have also been found in the Near East, by the way, the very area where the Nephilim were. I've found, for instance, accounts that go back to medieval times of giant bones being found in southeast Turkey. These may be connected with the whole concept of the Nephilim.
Ancient astronauts. Do you subscribe to that theory?
Not really, is the honest answer. I was brought up on books like Chariot of the Gods by Erich von Däniken. I'm also very much familiar of the works of Zecharia Sitchin. It just doesn't ring true with me. I was a UFO researcher for 35 years, and I believe that what we see as UFOs has very little to do with the rocket ships which Erich von Däniken or Zecharia Sitchin saw as visiting Earth in ancient times, bringing astronauts that look no different to our Apollo space missions or cosmonauts from Russia walking around on Earth and being portrayed in rock art around the world. It doesn't really ring true to me. I think that a lot of misinterpretation has gone on here. That's not to say that I don't believe that extraterrestrial contact has not taken place with humanity in some past age. I think that that's almost certain to have taken place. But for me, it would have been on a much, much more subtle level. We have the concept of quantum entanglement today, the idea that when a particle splits in two, subatomic particle, it retains some kind of contact with its partner across not only space, but also time, because it's something that happens beyond space-time. And this concept, this simple concept, brings in the idea that seas of particles in one place can communicate with seas of particles in another, creating everything from telepathy to mind over matter to precognition. And this is something that doesn't need to occur in a very confined space. It's something that might well have happened out in the universe. In other words, I think that if extraterrestrial forces have been in touch with humanity, they're doing it through the mind. It's through contact, through the contact with shamans, with our ancestors in the caves. Our ancestors might, for instance, have been in caves and suddenly some kind of power animal or celestial being appears to them and tells them to do something or go out and make something. And this information could easily have come from an extraterrestrial source. I have no problems with that at all. To me, that's a much more realistic way of looking at ancient astronauts.
This may be a bit esoteric, but why not? The Watchers, do you think they could have lived beyond time and space, a multidimensional creature?
Well, the Watchers that we're talking about here, I think, probably were flesh and blood beings that were born on Earth. However, quite clearly, the impact that they had on human evolution has created an entity which continues to exist somewhere out there on an ethereal level. In a way, they are the angels that people see and encounter in everything from near-death experiences to car crashes to visionary experiences. They are out there. They do exist. People can communicate with them. They can call them up through occult rituals. That they exist today. They have a reality of their own. So And it's a very strong memory. I mean, and the fact is that it was the rebel watchers that supposedly gave humanity the rudiments of civilization. Now, those rebel watchers are synonymous with the fallen angels. The reason they fell is that they departed from heaven. In a way, civilization is might well have been said to have come from the fallen angels. And this is a really quite edgy concept. You only have to mention fallen angels to some people and they shiver. Why is that? Why should pure mention of these ethereal beings that are only written about in ancient texts incite so much fear in people? And I think that it's because that somewhere inside us there is a memory of these events that continues to exist, and it has its own reality. And that, to me, is the ethereal reality of the Watchers.
Yeah, there's been some new science where they're discovering that memories are encoded in our DNA.
Well, I mean, obviously it's a sort of idea that brings forth the theory that dragons are in some way a memory of dinosaurs. In theory, no human being can ever have seen a dinosaur, and yet we depict dragons that are so similar to dinosaurs that it has to be some connection in some way. So it's the same with those who gave us the rudiments of civilization. Inside us somewhere, the idea that angels were in some way responsible for human evolution is within us all.
Is there any expected return of the Nephilim, or are they extinct?
There is no prophecy relating to the return of the Watchers and the Nephilim, certainly not that I'm aware of. However, it's something that's rising in popular consciousness as every decade goes by. Obviously, one of the reasons why we're talking about this subject now. And I think that with the discovery of places like Göbekli Tepe, the fact that these may well have been responsible in some way for human evolution, the Neolithic Revolution, that they were involved in all the early events in our own civilization, is something that's only going to grow with interest. And it's interesting that the lead archaeologist at Göbekli Tepe, Klaus Schmidt, has actually even linked the word watchers, or he actually called them the watchmen, with the pillars, the standing stones of the stone circles at Göbekli Tepe. He says, could these represent the watchmen of the period? In other words, these celestial beings or these first gods, or whoever that they were, these divine ancestors, perhaps they are the watchers here. So even archaeologists are making this link today. That's very important. I've got a book coming out in May called Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, that covers this subject in full. And obviously I would seriously recommend people have a look at that when it's available.
Yeah, and I'd like to talk to you about that when it comes out. You've taken a very scholarly approach, I must say, Andrew. Is the quality of information in general out there getting better or getting worse?
I think it's getting better. I mean, now we can actually look at the Watchers in terms of flesh and blood human beings, perhaps either our own ancestors or perhaps from some separate strain of humanity that existed, their offspring, that the Nephilim continued to exist, maybe in a hybrid form, and then perhaps mingled with human evolution to the point that it's within us all somewhere. You go back to the 1980s, and the best ideas that we had relating to the Watchers and the Nephilim were that they were ancient astronauts that came down to South Africa 200,000 years ago to mine our gold and take it off planet. I think we're advancing.
So you don't subscribe to that theory either, that the Anunnaki are secretly mining gold on Earth?
No, I'm afraid that I don't.
Where can the audience learn more about your research, Andrew, and plug some of your upcoming conferences?
If people want to join us in Turkey and have a look at Göbekli Tepe, we're doing a big tour out there at the end of May, Origins of Civilization tour. Just come on to andrewcollins.com. But as I said, to coincide with that tour, my own book, Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, is coming out through Inner Traditions, available through Amazon and Barnes & Noble, etc., etc. That's coming out in May this year, but just come on to andrewcollins.com. There's loads of stuff there, loads of interesting stuff, and I'll be happy to hear from people if you've got any views and ideas yourself on this subject.
One last question for you. What is the biggest misconception out there today about the Nephilim?
That they're space aliens. They were the hybrids between the Watchers and mortal kind. Whatever that means, I think that's what they were. You know, it's good to speculate. Yeah, because without speculation, we can't have theories, and without theories, we can't put into context any new evidence that comes out. For instance, we could find a complete copy of the Book of Giants, for instance, and that might back up some of these ideas, or it might take us into new directions. But it's places like Göbekli Tepe that are going to come out the biggest clues as to what was going on in the past. As present, only 1/10 of Göbekli Tepe has been uncovered by the archaeologists. Who knows what's in that other 90%? You know, some huge Atlantean crystal or evidence of extraterrestrial contact. It could be anything. But I think what it will show us is that the revolution that started civilization did not begin humbly, that something big occurred in the past that we're only now beginning to understand.
Andrew Collins, it's been great having you on the program today.
My pleasure.